Welcome our next Fireside Chat with Perianne Boring, President and Founder, Chamber of Digital Commerce. Hosted by Natalie Smolenski, Chair of the Board, Texas Blockchain Council.
All right. I mean, these conversations just keep on coming. This is what we mean by a high bandwidth conference. So Perianne, you are an industry veteran. You've been involved in the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency space from the very beginning. Let me just tell the audience a little bit about you as well. So Perianne, for those of you who don't know, she is the founder and president of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, the world's first and largest blockchain trade association. Headquartered in Washington, D.C., the Chamber of Commerce serves as a resource to public policymakers on digital assets. She was named one of America's top 50 women in tech by Forbes and one of the 10 most influential people in blockchain by CoinDesk. So we're really privileged to have Perianne with us today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So you can probably level set for us better than anyone else. Where are we at today, in blockchain policy?
Yeah, and as we were kind of putting this talk together, we wanted to talk about the existential threats facing Bitcoin, digital assets, and blockchain technology. And I think before we can really talk about kind of what those big threats are, we have to also appreciate where we are in Bitcoin and crypto policy. We are truly in an absolutely critical moment for public policy. We founded the Chamber in 2014, so we are in our 8th year of operations. We've really been at this since the earliest of days, and we are today seeing attacks from all fronts. And there's, when we talk about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, public policy, it crosses many bodies of law, from tax and accounting, securities laws, Treasury, things within the Treasury's jurisdiction like AML and illicit finance. And this technology has become, as we stated in the last panel, Bitcoin has become the best performing asset 10 out of the best 12 years. So it has a huge amount of attention from public policymakers, and this is causing a lot of questions on both the geopolitical stage, but also from the regulatory perspective. I truly believe that over the next 1 to 4 years, the policy issues that are being debated in Washington today and the decisions that are going to be made from our policymakers are going to set the trajectory for the next generation of how businesses are going to be able to build and operate on blockchain technologies in the United States. Like, this is the moment. If there's any moment in your entire life that you vote or care about policy or care about politics, it's right now.
Yeah, so maybe you can help us understand the stakes. Why is this so important? And if the U.S. gets it wrong and we say drive innovation offshore or fail to anticipate some of these threats, what's at stake there?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I think this technology is the most important technology we're going to see in our entire lives. And I'm incredibly bullish on Bitcoin, but I do think that blockchain technology is going to bring us applications above and beyond digital cash and digital gold. These are going to be the rails of the future digital economy. I think all transactions and all assets, tangible and intangible, will be tracked, traced, and recorded using blockchain technology. And as we continue to be globalized and more digital in nature, blockchains are going to be that infrastructure. I think it will be critical infrastructure in the future. And I think it's very much akin to the internet. And I think it's really important that Americans and policymakers truly look back and reflect on some of the most important decisions we made for our economy and what happened in the boom of the internet. It was invented at DARPA, so it was invented by the United States, and it was commercialized in partnership with the private sector. Businesses, small businesses, the private sector is the economic engine of the United States. If we had not done that with the internet, we would have ceded that technology to some other jurisdiction who would have gladly taken it. And the biggest companies in the world today came out of that era of policy that was meant to help grow and commercialize and build that architecture of the internet. we're in that next phase of blockchains. And if we don't get it right, if we don't recognize the role this technology will play in the future, and we discourage further innovation here, we're going to cede that to some other jurisdiction. And that is one of the things that keeps me up at night. That is my biggest fear for the United States.
Right. Well, and the analogy to the internet and the software industry is really apropos. I mean, if you think about our economic growth, U.S. economic growth over the past generation, the bulk of that has been in the software sector. I mean, we like to say now that software is eating the world.
Famous, yeah, yes. Mark Andreessen quote, absolutely.
Yes. Everything is moving into software. If we're not constantly on our toes and anticipating the next internet revolution, we could find ourselves in a generation with just completely stagnated growth and be able to trace it back to some of these decisions being made today.
Yeah, and I guess that came out a little bit in the last section too, where it's not just about business transactions, it's also about warfare and cyber warfare. And that's where the new fronts are.
Right. So, you talk about attacks coming from all fronts and the misinformation we read so often in the media. Let's talk about some of those. One thing that I've been hearing for a long time is cryptocurrency's role in ransomware. That Bitcoin is perpetuating ransomware attacks and it's the currency of choice for money laundering and illicit finance. Do you think that this will be used as a justification to ban or restrict crypto in general?
Yeah, this is happening right now, and it's really concerning. First off, ransomware happened before Bitcoin. It's been around much longer than that. But Bitcoin does have a role in ransomware, and this is something we're spending quite a bit of time talking about at the Chamber of Digital Commerce. Part of the narrative that is not being highlighted in the media, and even just today, there was a group of senators who sent a letter to the Department of Justice inquiring about what DOJ and Homeland Security is doing about cryptocurrency's role in ransomware. Even President Biden himself has given public speeches from the White House saying this needs to be a national and a state priority of addressing ransomware and cryptocurrency's role in ransomware. And I think this truly is an existential threat for Bitcoin in the United States, of using that as a reason to either restrict its use or further regulate it in a way that could really hamper its growth and development here in the United States. But a couple of things just to throw out about that. One, the current AML regime, the way in which financial institutions are required to collect different type of data and information from an anti-money laundering perspective, only prevents about 1% of anti-money laundering. It's not really all that effective. And yet our government is kind of copying and pasting that approach and putting it on this new technology and this new asset class. And maybe we should be taking a step back and kind of rethinking, can we modernize how we do this stuff? Can we use this technology to make it more efficient and to protect our financial system from legitimate threats, not be a tool for censorship? And according to Chainalysis, less than 1% of all transactions on the Bitcoin network have been facilitated with illicit activity. So why is there so much conversation and worry and focus on something that is statistically insignificant? So next time this comes up, for those of you who are in advocacy or talking with people who are trying to understand all this better, let's make sure we look at it from a broader perspective before we just kind of throw things out like, oh, we need to get rid of it because it's facilitating illicit activity. Let's look at the numbers first.
Right. And that actually raises another question. Whenever you see people making a big deal out of, a problem that doesn't really seem to be a problem based on the numbers, at least I tend to ask myself, what's psychologically driving this concern? Where's this really coming from? What do you think is really the issue here?
Well, control. It's control. But I think a big part of it is just the narrative. It's a really easy narrative for people to believe, ransomware has gone up, crypto plays a role in that, and therefore we need to restrict its use. So it's a very kind of, I think, just lazy way of approaching the issue. And I think we kind of deserve things that are more thoughtful in terms of public policy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the correlation is not causation. Logical fallacy is pretty much everywhere. And
yeah.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Okay, so, here in Texas, Bitcoin mining is obviously an important part of our state economy. But when the media talks about that, it's almost always about concerns around, amount of energy Bitcoin consumes and that it's bad for the environment. We touched a little bit on this in the Bitcoin mining panel, but from your point of view, what are the policy threats and considerations for mining specifically?
So this is another one where it's just kind of this very lazy mental approach to how we think about, in this case, energy policy. And I do think that there's climate change activists who have driven kind of very specific narratives that have made all over the mainstream media about Bitcoin. It uses a lot of energy, therefore it's bad for the environment, and we should just do away with it. And a lot of people just have believed that narrative because they've seen it over and over and over again in very credible media outlets. And there's a lot of people here at this conference today who have done a lot of hard work to do deep study and analysis and present data to refute a lot of that. And I think we've come a long way this year. However, we still have a lot of work to do specifically with Congress and state legislatures. So this year in the state of New York, there was a bill that was introduced that would create a 3-year moratorium on proof of work mining, essentially banning Bitcoin mining for a 3-year period in that state. And the justification of that was because of the climate change issues. Perceived, alleged climate change impacts Bitcoin mining is having in the state of New York. So I do think this is one policy issue where the media has played a really big role in shaping conversations that are happening both in Congress and with regulators and in the states, because they see these headlines, they kind of think, okay, we should probably do something. Let's go ban it or let's go restrict it. And that's now happening. So it's when we think about existential threats, anything that could restrict Bitcoin being mined on US soil, a critical piece of infrastructure from being developed here, to me, that's really cutting off the industry at the knees and is something we really need to address as a community. So at the Chamber of Digital Commerce, this summer we launched a mining initiative, and we're working with most of the mining companies that are here throughout the United States. And we're doing work from a 3-pronged perspective. So one is on a federal side. There's a lot of federal stakeholders involved in energy policy. There's not just one energy regulator. It's kind of split up across many different groups. So we're doing a whole stakeholder map of what that looks like and engaging with our federal policymakers, educating them on what proof of work is, asking them if they have concerns, addressing those concerns, and helping shape proactive in anything that may be happening on a federal level. And then the second piece is doing state work. So we are working with the state of New York, and then we're also supporting mining companies that are in the United States, getting them connected to their state and local representatives so they can share what they're building in their state, so you don't have another issue like what we saw this year in the state of New York. And then the third piece of that is working with the media. So we do have a PR and a comms and a marketing team at the Chamber that's actively working with journalists to educate them and make sure that they're talking to actual technical and industry experts as they're writing and covering Bitcoin mining, to make sure what we're seeing is honest and intellectually honest. So this really is a threat. I think we need to get ahead of it, and something we're putting a lot of resources behind right now.
Yeah, that's great. Moving to the next thought, Treasury Secretary Yellen recently convened the President's Working Group of Financial Markets to assess the risks that stablecoins may pose to the financial system. They plan to issue a report with policy recommendations this fall. The premise around all of this is that stablecoins may pose systemic risk to the financial system. Do they? And what type of policy recommendations do you expect to see from the President's Working Group for Stablecoins?
Yeah, that is the question. And there's now a very intense focus on the risk stablecoins are playing in the financial markets. Stablecoins are about $126 billion market cap. That's pretty significant for stablecoins because they really haven't been around that long. But when we look at measuring systemic risk, I don't really understand how this could ever be on the same chart as multi-trillion-dollar markets that are highly leveraged. So I think the premise as to why there's this deep concern and now focus from regulators on now coming in and changing a regulatory structure for a market that's in flight should be looked at more closely. As Natalie stated, we are going to see policy recommendations from the President's working group. That working group is consisted of the top regulators and bank regulators, including the SEC, and they're going to issue within the coming weeks their recommendations on kind of a new regulatory oversight structure for stablecoins. We don't know what's in that, but I think some things that we can expect to see would potentially be a power grab from the SEC to try to call all of these things securities. Chair Gary Gensler, the SEC chairman, has testified and given speeches a couple times over the past couple of weeks where he's changed his vernacular and he's now calling stablecoins stable value funds. And he's using that term for a very specific reason. And I think he's setting himself up to try to bring these into the SEC's jurisdiction. But these are payment systems. They're not securities. And if the government tries to regulate them as securities, that could really restrict how stablecoins operate in the crypto markets, and they play an essential function. So that's one policy recommendation that's possible, or maybe the Fed will come out and say they should be regulated as payment instruments. Either way, when we use this word stablecoins, I'm kind of throwing that term around relatively loosely, but as you know, those who are in this ecosystem know, there's lots of different types of stablecoins. There's banks that are issuing like digital representations of fiat money that they hold. You have different stablecoins that are backed one-to-one to the dollar, and they have dollars in a bank account, in a reserve. You have things that are fully decentralized. You have algorithmic-based stablecoins, and you have like things all the way in between. So this is just an ecosystem in and of itself. So one of the things that we're working on and advocating for at the Chamber is like, let's not just kind of get kind of caught up thinking these are going to cause systemic risk and now we have to call them this or that. I think when we look at this from a policy perspective, we have to take into account the fact that this is a very dynamic marketplace in and of itself, and a one-size-fits-all approach could likely cause more systemic risk to the system than anything else. So this is something that we're watching at the Chamber. We are expecting to see this in the coming weeks. And we're doing a lot to ensure that our public policymakers really understand how stablecoins work and make sure that the industry has a voice at the table as their future is being determined today.
Yeah, just keying off of that real quick, you mentioned that stablecoins play a critical role in the digital economy. We have a lot of people in the audience today who they understand, what Bitcoin is and the role Bitcoin plays in financial self-sovereignty, or Ethereum, or perhaps other cryptocurrencies. What role do stablecoins play, or roles that is necessary to kind of keep this economy functioning and growing?
Well, stablecoins represent a large amount of the volume on exchanges today. Traders use stablecoins for essential parts of their trading strategies. They're used to add additional liquidity in trading strategies, and they're a part of the ecosystem. So I think the role of a stablecoin looks very, very different than Bitcoin, and it also looks very different than Ethereum, and Ethereum's role looks very different than Bitcoin, and vice versa. So one of my theories about kind of the crypto economy, there's this huge proliferation of cryptocurrencies that have been introduced over the past close to a decade. And I think there'll probably be just a handful that ultimately make it to kind of adoption, mass adoption. When it comes to something being a store of value, I believe Bitcoin has already won that use case. That is it. No one else is going to beat Bitcoin. Many have tried. They failed in a very glamorous way. Bitcoin is going to be the future of digital gold. It'll be akin to digital gold, and it will be used as a store of value. So there's that. So the next, when we talk about like Ethereum, we're talking about smart contracts. Those play another very different function. I think it's too early to tell what chain is going to be the winner in that. But smart contracts and decentralized applications also play a very different function than a store of value. Stablecoins, that's a medium of exchange. That's your transactional layer. You can use that for payments. So these things, it doesn't have to be kind of a one or the other. You don't have to be a Bitcoin maximalist and hate everything else. You can see a place where there's different types of chains that serve different types of functions. And on the last panel, one of the points that I kind of wanted to talk about is how Bitcoin and a digital dollar, whether it's a stable coin or something a central bank makes, those things can live together. And the government can get behind a strategy that uses both, where people will use Bitcoin as their store of value, like their savings accounts, and you'll use your digital dollar, whomever makes it, whether it's a government issued digital dollar or a private sector or a fully decentralized digital dollar, that will be used for transactions like your checking account. And these two things can work simultaneously. So it's not a one size fits all approach, but stablecoins are an important part. And today we can use them for payments. And I think we really should be harnessing that. And I also think that they can extend the strength of the dollar because it's putting dollars in places in the metaverse that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's very helpful. So talking about the SEC and Chair Gensler, he recently stated that he agrees with Chair Clayton that the vast majority of cryptocurrencies are securities. What do you think we can expect to see from the SEC around crypto?
Oh, yeah. So certainly have a lot of concerns about what's happening at the SEC under Chair Gensler's leadership, and looking forward to having Hester here, Commissioner Peirce here next to kind of talk about her thoughts as well, because she has a view from the inside. But really the biggest issue that the digital asset ecosystem is facing, and the biggest question we have been asking the SEC for going on half a decade now, is when is a token a security and when is it not? And it's truly to my own demise that we don't have this clarity, because we're still working on getting solutions to this. But we first raised this issue in 2016 when we saw this big boom of ICOs, and there were lots of things that we were concerned about during that era. But it really brought and it shed a lot of light to which tokens are securities and which ones are not, and how do you make that determination? Chair Gensler has made a number of comments where he has said, I think the industry does have clarity. They have perfect clarity. I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's even honest to say. I don't agree with that. There's other commissioners that sit, on the commission with Chair Gensler who don't believe that. None of the companies that I represent believe that. We represent over 200 ecosystem players, and they're all asking these questions. And we also represent over 40 different law firms who their clients are building in this exact space. And even the lawyers are saying that we have a really hard time giving counsel to companies who are building these projects and really understanding when they're in and when they're out of the SEC's jurisdiction. So this is absolutely a critical issue, and it is really disappointing to see that we have to kind of petition our government in this way. The way that the SEC is currently being led is regulation through enforcement. And I just don't think that really honors our values as an American society. And I believe that businesses deserve to have clarity on what the rules to the road are. I don't think it's right to just kind of let people hang out there with the fear of enforcement always hanging under their head. So it's absolutely essential that we get clarity from the SEC. So I'll kind of tell you, some of the ways that we're attacking this today. So Commissioner Hester Peirce, who we'll hear from next, she has proposed a safe harbor for digital tokens. And the problem is that she's only one of many commissioners, so she needs the SEC to put it forward for rulemaking. And to date, they have not decided to do that. So at the Chamber, we are urging the SEC to do that, and we're using different advocacy tools that we have to try to petition that a formal rulemaking on her safe harbor. And then we've also taken this issue to Congress, and today, and again, we've been working on this for a couple of years now, there's estimated 30 members of Congress who have gone to bat for us on this topic. By us, I mean us, the community. There are about a half a dozen legislative proposals that have been introduced in Congress to try to address this. The most recent one was just introduced last week by the House Financial Services Ranking Member, Patrick McHenry, where he took Hester Peirce's safe harbor and he introduced it in a legislative form. And then just so you all can kind of appreciate the type of boulder that we're pushing up the hills in Washington, I previously worked on Capitol Hill. I've been inside the legislative process. Only about 2% of pieces of legislation that ever get introduced actually become law. It really is an unbelievable feat to get a member of Congress to sponsor a legislative proposal and get that through the legislative process. So I mentioned there was about a half a dozen proposals. One has already passed the House, and it's awaiting introduction in the Senate. In the meantime, there's been a few others that have been introduced. So this is not something that I think we're going to be able to fix today or tomorrow, but know that there's an entire community of people working on this issue. And this is something that it takes an incredible degree of sophistication and strategy to be able to get over the finish line.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Perianne, for the work you do and for sharing your insights on everything that's going on now in Washington and beyond on the policy front. I just want to say, the Texas Blockchain Council is proud to have you and the Digital Chamber of Commerce as a partner. You guys wrote the OG legislative toolkit for blockchain technology. We produced a Texas version of that legislative toolkit together, which you can find at texasblockchaincouncil.org. And that's really a great place to start. For anyone who's here from out of state, you want to get something similar going in your state, or if you just want to learn more about the policy landscape and the recommendations that Perianne and our teams are proposing, that legislative toolkit is a great place to start. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right.